The airport thrummed with life. Rolling luggage, hurried footsteps, the clatter of announcements echoing across the terminal. Fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors, bouncing across the walls crowded with advertisements promising luxury vacations and endless comfort. Among the sea of travelers, Sophia Hart moved like a shadow, purposeful and calm. Her long, lean frame carried the quiet confidence of someone who had endured far more than anyone around her could imagine. She had just returned from a grueling humanitarian mission in Central Africa. Weeks spent navigating hostile territory, negotiating with armed militias, and rescuing children from the edge of famine had left scars visible and invisible. Her uniform had been replaced by casual travel clothes, soft black pants, a gray hoodie, but the air about her betrayed her history. Every step was measured, precise, the legacy of Navy SEAL training etched into the way she carried herself. As she approached the gate for her flight to New York, she handed the boarding pass to the attendant. The woman scanned it, her brow furrowing slightly. "Ma'am, this is first class," she said politely, though there was a hint of hesitation. Sophia looked at her ticket, then back at the attendant. "I know, I have a seat." The attendant cleared her throat and gestured toward the cabin. "I'm sorry, but this section is reserved. You'll need to move to economy." For a fleeting moment, Sophia froze. The humiliation of being forcibly removed from a place she had paid for, and more than that deserved, was almost tangible. She had faced insurgents, death, and deprivation. But this, being judged and cast aside in a sterile, corporate environment, felt absurd, yet cutting. Her jaw tightened. A man seated near the first row chuckled, his expression dripping condescension. "Yeah, this isn't for people like you," he sneered. Heat rose in her chest, a familiar signal of the fight-or-flight response, though she tamped it down instantly. She had spent years learning to control this exact instinct, channeling it into focus rather than reaction. Sophia straightened her spine and attempted to ignore the whispers spreading across the cabin. She gripped her boarding pass tightly, a silent assertion of her right to be there. Before she could protest further, two flight attendants approached. They were firm, polite, yet unyielding, their hands subtly guiding her toward the aisle. As she walked, Sophia caught her reflection in the glossy panel of a nearby partition. The sleeve of her hoodie had slipped slightly, revealing a small, faded tattoo on her shoulder, the trident insignia of a Navy SEAL. She knew it would be recognizable to anyone in the know. She glanced around discreetly. A young man across the aisle squinted, his gaze lingering for a heartbeat too long. None of the passengers spoke, but Sophia felt the subtle shift, a ripple of curiosity in the air. Seated now in the narrow confines of economy, Sophia exhaled slowly, trying to center herself. She could already feel the tension radiating from nearby passengers, some sympathetic, some judgmental. She glanced out the window at the city lights twinkling below, a reminder that life was moving onward, indifferent to her humiliation. Her phone buzzed. A message from an old SEAL comrade appeared. "Didn't think I'd see you stuck in coach. You okay?" A wry smile tugged at her lips despite the circumstances. The absurdity of it all was staggering. She had been dropped behind enemy lines in hostile territory, survived ambushes, negotiated with armed warlords, and now she was being made to feel small over a seating arrangement. She sank into her seat, closing her eyes for a brief moment. The cabin lights cast a warm glow over the passengers, the gentle hum of the plane's engines beginning to build. She could feel every nervous glance from those around her, every whispered word about the woman forced from first class. Then, over the intercom, the pilot's voice cut through the ambient chatter. "Is there a Sophia Hart aboard Flight 892 to New York? Please come to the cockpit." The entire cabin seemed to freeze for a moment. Sophia's pulse spiked. The voice carried authority, calm but unmistakably commanding. Her training told her to assess the situation, but instinctively she felt that this call was different. Passengers leaned forward, whispering, craning their necks to see her reaction. A few recorded on their phones. She felt a mix of curiosity and anxiety ripple through the cabin like electricity. Was this routine, or had someone finally recognized the seal on her shoulder? Sophia rose, her movements deliberate, each step precise, exuding the calm intensity that had earned her the respect of her teammates and enemies alike in war zones half a world away. The aisle seemed to narrow as whispers chased her down, the curious eyes of strangers following her every move. The cockpit door loomed ahead, open, revealing a man in his 40s with piercing eyes and an air of quiet authority. His presence commanded attention without a word, and the subtle lines on his face suggested experience in high-pressure situations. "Sophia Hart," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "I recognized your insignia. Navy SEAL, correct?" Sophia nodded, instinctively cautious. "Yes, sir." He gave a small, approving smile. "I had a feeling. I thought you might be the woman they just escorted out of first class." Relief and tension warred within her. Recognition came with its own complications. She had trained to expect danger in the most unpredictable situations, but this was a different battlefield. "Sit down for a moment," the pilot said, gesturing toward a seat beside the controls. "We have a situation up front and I could use your expertise." Sophia hesitated. Advice? On a commercial flight? Her mind raced. She had diffused more dangerous situations with less information than this. Her fingers itched to act, to assess the threat, to neutralize it if necessary. The crew watched her warily, sensing the authority she carried in her presence. Even without her uniform, the aura of someone who had survived hellish training and life-threatening missions surrounded her. As she walked closer, the murmurs of passengers grew into a crescendo of curiosity. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded every measured step. Whispers spread. Is she really a SEAL? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as she approached the cockpit. The tension was palpable. Would she be able to resolve this humiliation without igniting a larger incident? The uncertainty made every heartbeat thunder in her chest. And just as she reached the cockpit threshold, a final glance revealed the faint insignia on her shoulder, her secret symbol, a mark that could turn whispers into awe or fear. The suspense lingered. Would someone recognize it in time? And if they did, how would this simple flight turn into an unforgettable confrontation? Economy class felt like a different world. The narrow seats compressed Sophia's long legs, and the hum of the engines vibrated through the floor. The air smelled faintly of reheated meals and stale coffee, a far cry from the sterile luxury she had been forced out of only minutes earlier. Around her, passengers fidgeted, some casting curious glances, others busying themselves with phones or newspapers, pretending not to notice the woman who had just been ejected from first class. Sophia slid into her seat, next to a toddler who immediately began wailing, his small fists pounding the armrest. She exhaled quietly and adjusted her hoodie, covering the small, faded Navy SEAL trident on her shoulder. Though hidden, the symbol remained a subtle reminder of who she was and what she was capable of. The flight attendants offered polite smiles, but they were distant, a subtle blend of discomfort and disapproval in their posture. Sophia's pulse remained steady, her breathing controlled. Years of military training had honed her to remain calm under pressure, but even she couldn't ignore the sting of humiliation. Around her, the cabin murmured. A woman 3 rows back whispered to her companion, nodding towards Sophia. "Did you see what just happened?" The man beside her leaned closer. "I think she's military." Sophia's mind flickered to the countless missions she had survived. Ambushes in deserts, firefights in foreign villages, nights without sleep navigating hostile territories. And yet, here she was, stripped of dignity by airline personnel, judged for appearances rather than merit. The contrast was almost laughable, but not enough to make her smile. Her phone buzzed, a message from an old SEAL buddy. "Didn't think I'd see you stuck in coach. You okay?" She typed back quickly. "I'll survive, just another mission, one less comfortable than usual. Her smirk faded as she surveyed the cabin. The whispers persisted, a low, omnipresent hum, and she noticed that some eyes lingered a fraction too long, drawn perhaps by curiosity, perhaps by the faint glimpse of her tattoo peeking through her sleeve. Some passengers' stares were filled with admiration, others carried judgment. Suddenly the PA crackled, the pilot's calm, commanding voice slicing through the ambient noise. "Is there a Sophia Hart aboard Flight 892 to New York? Please come to the cockpit." The entire cabin seemed to freeze. People craned their necks, whispering, exchanging looks of disbelief. Sophia's pulse quickened. Her eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't routine. The precision and authority in the pilot's voice suggested urgency. Her instincts sharpened, every nerve alert. She rose from her seat, moving deliberately, her gait a blend of calm authority and measured intent. Cameras flicked up, phones recorded, and a ripple of curiosity traveled through the cabin. The passengers were drawn into her orbit, sensing that the situation was about to escalate into something extraordinary. As she approached the cockpit, the stewardess closest to her leaned in and whispered, I think he recognized your insignia." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. Recognition in a moment like this was a double-edged sword. It could mean respect, or it could attract unwanted attention. She had navigated hostile territory where her own identity could either save her or endanger her. She understood instinctively how much weight this small detail could carry. The cockpit door was open, revealing the pilot, a man with a calm, commanding presence. His eyes, sharp and steady, held the kind of authority that demanded attention. There was no doubt in her mind that he had been in high-pressure situations before. His posture and tone radiated experience and control. "Sophia Hart," he said firmly, yet without hostility. "I recognize the insignia on your shoulder. Navy SEAL, correct?" She nodded, her expression guarded. "Yes, sir." He smiled faintly, approvingly. "I thought so. I had a feeling you might be the woman they just escorted out of first class." Relief and tension warred inside her. Recognition carried validation, but it also carried responsibility. Her instincts were now fully engaged. Something unusual was unfolding, and she had no idea what it might entail. "Sit down for a moment," the pilot said, gesturing toward a seat near the controls. "We have a problem in first class, and I need your perspective." Sophia's brow arched slightly. "Problem here?" He nodded. "Yes. A passenger is causing significant disturbance, and given your background, I thought your insight could help resolve it without escalating further." She paused for a moment, considering the absurdity. Negotiating with a hostile passenger at 35,000 feet in a metal tube suspended above the Atlantic, all while managing her own humiliation. But she reminded herself, this was just another mission. The skill set was different, but the principles remained. Observe, assess, act decisively, and maintain calm authority. As she followed him, the murmurs in the cabin swelled. Passengers were recording, whispering, speculating. Sophia could feel the anticipation, the electric curiosity in the air, every eye drawn to the mysterious woman being summoned to the cockpit. She had faced hostile eyes before, intense ones, dangerous ones, but never ones fueled by mere intrigue and gossip. The stewardesses flanking her were tense, uncertain how to navigate this unusual situation. Sophia offered them a reassuring nod, a quiet, silent command that told them she had control. The SEAL mindset, command presence without aggression, was visible even in the tight confines of a commercial airplane. Finally, she reached the cockpit threshold. The pilot's eyes met hers again. "You don't need to worry," he said quietly but firmly. "We handle this calmly, but your presence may be persuasive." Her pulse steadied. She had always preferred action over words, presence over spectacle, and yet here perception was a tool as important as skill. One glance, one subtle gesture could diffuse or escalate the situation. Sophia's eyes flicked down to her shoulder, where the tattoo peeked out faintly. A small, silent emblem that carried a lifetime of experience, of missions survived, of battles fought, both foreign and personal. And now, in the fluorescent-lit cabin of a commercial airliner, it held power. The pilot's hand rested lightly on the controls, signaling both trust and expectation. The stakes, though not immediately life-threatening, were emotionally charged and publicly visible. One wrong move, one misjudged word, and the confrontation in first class could spiral. Sophia inhaled, her senses sharpening. The crowd of passengers in the cabin, the murmurs, the whispers, the cameras, all faded into the periphery as her focus centered on the task ahead. Restore order, command respect, and maintain dignity. The suspense hung thick in the air. Would she be able to handle this unexpected mission with the same precision that had carried her through the world's most dangerous places? And more importantly, would the passengers finally recognize the authority and skill of the woman they had underestimated merely because she was a woman, casually dressed, and momentarily vulnerable? Her next step would determine the tone of the entire flight. And as she stepped toward first class, ready to face the man who had mocked her, the whispers and the weight of hundreds of eyes, Sophia Hart knew one truth. Humiliation could be temporary, but presence, skill, and quiet authority commanded lasting respect. And as the cabin waited, holding its collective breath, she prepared for the first of many moves in a delicate, high-stakes game of perception, authority and courage all unfolding in the strangest battlefield she had ever encountered. Sophia stepped into the cockpit, and the world seemed to contract into a tense, focused silence. The cabin behind her was still buzzing with whispers, the faint hum of the plane's engines blending with the low murmur of passengers. But up here, in this small, confined space, all that mattered was the man before her, the pilot. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that could pierce through pretense. Lines etched into his face hinted at decades of experience in high-stress situations, and there was a calm, unshakable authority in the way he moved. Every motion, from the way he rested a hand lightly on the controls to the quiet tilt of his head, conveyed command without arrogance. Sophia felt a familiar pull, the pull of respect earned and tested in life-or-death scenarios. "Sophia Hart," the pilot said, his voice firm, clear, but not unkind. "I recognize the insignia on your shoulder. Navy SEAL, correct?" She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, sir." A faint smile touched his lips, a subtle acknowledgement of understanding. "I had a feeling. I thought you might be the woman they just escorted out of first class." Relief mixed with tension in her chest. Recognition, even from a stranger, was validating, but it also meant responsibility. In her line of work, being noticed could save lives or make you a target. Her instincts, honed through countless missions, flared. Something unusual was unfolding here, and she had to stay sharp. "Sit down for a moment," he said, gesturing to a small jump seat beside the controls. "We have a situation in first class, and I could use your perspective." Sophia hesitated. A situation? Here. She glanced at the rows of passengers visible through the cockpit window, their faces blurred but attentive, their whispers cutting through the cabin. "Problem?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with curiosity. "Yes," he said. "A passenger is causing a significant disturbance. The crew's attempts to de-escalate have failed. Given your background, I thought you might be able to help resolve this, quietly and efficiently." Her military mind instantly shifted into assessment mode. Every detail mattered. The cabin layout, the passengers' behavior, the emotional undercurrents in the air. She scanned the limited view she had, nodding the man in question. A tall figure slouched in his seat, muttering into his phone, unaware yet that he was about to meet someone he had underestimated. Sophia's pulse steadied. She had been in hostile villages where every glance, every misstep could mean danger or death. The tactics were different, but the principle remained. Observe, evaluate, act decisively. The stewardesses outside the cockpit watched with thinly veiled curiosity and apprehension. Sophia gave them a subtle nod, a silent reassurance that she had control, that they could trust her judgment. Authority did not always require words, she reminded herself. Presence could speak louder. The pilot leaned slightly forward, his eyes holding hers. The key here is perception. Your presence alone might diffuse the situation, but I need you to guide it. Sophia absorbed the words. She had led SEAL teams into hostile zones, negotiated with armed combatants, diffused bombs, literal, emotional, political. Yet the tension here was different, subtle, psychological. Passengers were on edge. The crew was nervous. A single misjudged step could escalate into panic, chaos, or confrontation. She allowed herself a faint glance down at her shoulder. The SEAL trident, barely visible beneath her hoodie, was a silent emblem of skill and authority. Few would recognize it in a commercial airplane, but the pilot had. And in that recognition lay her leverage. Her mind raced through options: speak, act, or simply project presence. Sometimes the mere suggestion of capability could alter behavior. She had seen it countless times during missions. Confidence, calm, and authority could diffuse situations without physical action. A final breath, a tightening of the spine, and she stood, moving toward first class. Each step was deliberate, controlled. The murmurs in the cabin intensified as passengers realized she was returning, summoned by the pilot. Whispers, phones raised, eyes wide, they all felt the tension ripple outward. The stewardesses flanking her were cautious, unsure how to assist without interfering. Sophia's gaze met theirs, and she offered a subtle nod, projecting reassurance, calm authority. Her presence alone began to shift the energy in the cabin, a subtle but undeniable change. As she approached the first-class section, she caught sight of the man who had sneered at her. His confident smirk faltered as their eyes met. For a fleeting moment, he didn't know what to do, an unfamiliar uncertainty washing over him. He hadn't seen the tattoo. He hadn't recognized the quiet authority that radiated from someone who had stared death in the face and returned unshaken. Sophia didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, allowing him to sense the power in calmness, the weight of experience. She had learned long ago that intimidation did not need volume or violence. Presence, control, and a subtle gaze could accomplish more than shouting or confrontation ever could. The pilot's voice over the intercom added another layer of weight. "We have a Navy SEAL aboard. Situation under control." The man's eyes widened slightly, his body tensing. The other passengers leaned forward, watching, anticipating. Cameras clicked. Phones raised. Social media feeds were about to have a viral moment, and Sophia felt the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she had earned respect without demanding it. She finally spoke, her voice low, measured, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. I'm not here to humiliate you, but I won't be ignored or disrespected." The man shifted in his seat, uncomfortably aware that his power in this cabin had been undercut. Sophia didn't have to raise her voice. The calm intensity in her stance and gaze spoke louder than any words. Passengers around them murmured. Some whispered praise, others stared, incredulous. Sophia felt a familiar rush, the quiet pride of recognition. She had faced far more dangerous challenges, and yet this was about control, perception, and respect. The stakes were lower, but the tension was real. She glanced briefly at the pilot, who gave her a small nod. Trust, recognition, and subtle acknowledgement passed silently between them. This was no ordinary flight. The pilot had recognized her skill, and now she had the responsibility to act, to command respect, to de-escalate the situation without chaos. The man's hands trembled slightly as he realized the dynamics had shifted. This wasn't about tickets, seating, or privilege anymore. He was facing someone with experience, discipline, and lethal calm, the kind of presence that could turn a hostile encounter into a controlled resolution. Sophia's heart remained steady, though her mind stayed alert. Every eye on the cabin could be a variable, every whisper a potential complication. She assessed, recalculated, and prepared. She was ready for the confrontation, but not with anger, with precision, with authority. And as she stepped fully into first class, passengers held their collective breath, sensing something extraordinary about to unfold. The SEAL on their plane wasn't just a veteran. She was an agent of calm in a storm, a force that demanded respect and attention without raising her voice. The suspense was thick. Would the man back down quietly, or would he challenge her, forcing an escalation in front of everyone? Could Sophia manage this delicate situation with the same skill that had kept her alive in the most dangerous corners of the world? Her first words were about to determine the outcome. An invisible battle of authority, perception, and calm strength, unfolding at 35,000 feet, witnessed by hundreds of strangers. The stage was set. Every passenger, crew member, and even the pilot waited in tense anticipation. Sophia Hart, Navy SEAL, was about to reclaim respect, not through force, but through the sheer presence of experience, authority, and quiet, unshakable confidence. Sophia Hart stepped into first class with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention without demanding it. The cabin, once filled with whispers and subtle sneers, seemed to stiffen the moment she appeared. The soft hum of the plane's engines faded into background noise as every passenger's gaze instinctively followed her, drawn by the aura she carried, a mix of calm authority, controlled intensity, and unspoken experience. The man who had earlier mocked her now sat rigid, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. His smirk had vanished, replaced with a mixture of uncertainty and disbelief. He had expected compliance, embarrassment, perhaps even submission. What he saw instead was someone entirely unshakable, her presence alone a challenge that made him hesitate. "Ma'am," the pilot's voice echoed through the intercom, calm and firm, "please remain seated and stay calm. We have Navy SEAL assistants on board. The situation is under control." The words barely penetrated the thick tension in the cabin, but the passengers caught them, the low murmurs transforming into cautious awe. Phones were discreetly raised, cameras clicked, and every eye was now on Sophia. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the kind that sharpened perception and honed focus, the kind that had kept her alive in deserts, jungles, and urban war zones. Sophia's gaze locked on the man, steady and unwavering. Her voice, when it came, was soft but precise, carrying the weight of authority without a hint of anger. "Let's make one thing clear," she said, her words cutting through the murmur of the cabin. "No one here wants a conflict, but I will not be disrespected and I will not allow chaos." The man swallowed, his confidence cracking under the weight of her presence. His eyes darted around the cabin, searching for an ally, a witness, or a justification. But all he found were passengers leaning forward, holding their breath, silently acknowledging that Sophia was in control. A stewardess tried to intervene, her voice trembling slightly. "Sir, please, maybe just calm down." Sophia raised a hand, a subtle, measured gesture. "Let him speak if he must, but I will respond in kind. Calm, clear, precise." The man opened his mouth, then hesitated. The familiar tension of confrontation in his body was met with the unfamiliar realization that this was not a typical civilian dispute. He was facing a trained operator, someone who had survived situations far deadlier than an airline seating conflict. The trident tattoo on her shoulder, though mostly hidden under her sleeve, was no mere decoration. It was a silent symbol of experience, authority, and lethal capability. He tried again, his voice shaky. I didn't know, Sophia's eyes never left his. "Not knowing isn't an excuse," she said calmly. "You underestimated someone who earned respect through action, not appearances. That ends now." Around them, passengers shifted in their seats, some visibly leaning back, others straightening with renewed interest. The cabin felt like a courtroom, the audience fully aware that a lesson in humility and respect was about to unfold. The pilot's eyes flicked towards Sophia, a silent acknowledgement of trust. This was a situation he had never trained for in flight school, but he instinctively knew that she was the right person to handle it. He gave a subtle nod, the only communication needed between two professionals who understood authority and control. Sophia moved slowly, deliberately, closer to the man. Every step was measured, a silent assertion of dominance and calm control. She stopped just short of the aisle, maintaining a respectful distance, her voice lowering but intensifying in impact. "You have a choice," she said quietly, but her words carried through the cabin with uncanny clarity. "You can apologize, respect the space of others, and allow this flight to continue without incident. Or you can escalate and demonstrate publicly that you misjudged who you were dealing with." The man's jaw clenched. He looked around, realizing the eyes of nearly every passenger were on him, silently urging him to comply. Some were leaning forward, some whispering in awe, but all were witnessing a transformation. Humiliation had shifted from Sophia to him. He muttered, barely audible, I'm sorry." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line, her expression neutral. She wasn't here for gratitude. She was here to restore order, assert respect, and demonstrate the subtle authority that came from experience, training, and presence. She nodded once, acknowledging the minimal compliance, then took a step back, giving him space while maintaining her control over the situation. The murmurs among the passengers shifted, growing into discreet applause and audible whispers. Some reached for their phones, recording the confrontation, already aware they had witnessed something extraordinary. Others simply stared, stunned into silence. Sophia had turned a situation that could have spiraled into humiliation and chaos into a display of calm dominance and respect. But she knew this was only temporary. The adrenaline that fueled her clarity was finite, and the cabin, though quieter now, was still a powder keg of nerves. She glanced around, assessing the environment. Every passenger, crew member, and even the pilot was alert. Every detail mattered: the placement of hands, the posture of the man, the expressions of those around her. Suddenly, a small child cried, breaking the tenuous calm. Sophia's instincts didn't skip a beat. She crouched slightly, speaking softly to the toddler, diffusing the tension with warmth rather than authority. The child quieted instantly, mesmerized by her calm presence. The contrast was striking. One moment she was a commanding figure facing a defiant adult. The next, she was soothing a frightened child with gentle reassurance. This duality, the combination of lethal capability and empathy, was what made her extraordinary. The passengers, already in awe, now witnessed not just control, but humanity. They were seeing the full measure of what it meant to command presence without resorting to force. Sophia's eyes flicked back to the man. His body language had shifted. He was no longer aggressive, no longer defiant. He sat rigid, aware of the lesson he had just received. Respect, she realized, was often learned in moments of quiet dominance, not loud confrontation. A few moments later, the pilot's voice cut through the cabin once again. "Thank you, Ms. Hart. The situation is resolved. Please return to your seat." Sophia straightened, exhaling softly, and turned to return to economy. Every step carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced danger and emerged unshaken. The cabin's atmosphere had transformed. Whispers of awe replaced murmurs of doubt. Subtle nods of respect replaced skeptical glances. As she passed the passengers, she caught fleeting expressions of admiration, incredulity, and relief. One woman whispered to her companion, "I can't believe that she just handled it." Another passenger murmured, "Did you see the tattoo?" Sophia allowed herself a faint, private smile. For years, she had operated in situations where life and death hinged on clarity, focus, and authority. Here, in the strange theater of commercial aviation, she had applied the same principles. The mission had been different, but the skills were the same. Yet she knew the calm was temporary. In her line of work, every resolution was fleeting, every victory provisional. The adrenaline that had sharpened her perception would fade, and new challenges could arise at any moment. She remained alert, her senses still attuned to subtle cues, her mind analyzing every detail in the cabin. The man she had confronted slouched slightly, his face pale, his eyes avoiding hers. Humiliation and newfound respect waged an invisible battle within him. For the first time, he had seen someone who would not tolerate disrespect, someone whose authority and presence were absolute, silent, and undeniable. Sophia returned to her seat in economy, careful to maintain composure, while the passengers continued to whisper and glance her way. Phones were still raised, discreetly capturing the scene. Her presence had altered the energy of the cabin. Order had been restored not by force, but by the quiet, commanding authority that radiated from her every movement and word. As the plane ascended and the city lights below blurred into a mosaic of color, Sophia leaned back in her seat, finally allowing a deep breath. She had restored respect, asserted her authority, and diffused a volatile situation, all without raising her voice or escalating the conflict. But she knew better than to let herself relax completely. Even in the calmest moments, threats, visible or hidden, could emerge. Her eyes flicked to the aisle, noting the subtle movements of passengers, the body language of crew, and the potential for disruption. Experience had taught her that awareness never truly rested. The suspense lingered, a taut thread in the air. Would this calm endure for the duration of the flight? Or would another challenge emerge, testing the limits of her patience, skill, and authority? Sophia Hart, Navy SEAL, had reclaimed respect, not with intimidation or anger, but through presence, precision, and the quiet, undeniable force of experience. The first-class standoff was over, but the flight was far from ordinary. And as she settled back into her seat, passengers watched, still murmuring, still recording, and still awed by the woman who had walked through humiliation, confrontation, and tension, and emerged completely unshaken. The tension in first class began to dissolve, though not entirely. Sophia Hart had diffused the immediate threat, yet the energy in the cabin was thick with anticipation. Passengers whispered among themselves, leaning forward to recount what they had just witnessed. Phones clicked, recording the scene, and the soft hum of the engine seemed almost secondary to the palpable sense of awe and curiosity. The man who had caused the initial conflict slumped back into his seat, his posture defeated, a mixture of embarrassment and reluctant respect settling over him. Sophia's presence alone had recalibrated the hierarchy in the cabin. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself the satisfaction of silent victory. She didn't gloat, she didn't need to. The subtle shift in the room, the quiet acknowledgement in the eyes of passengers, the soft nods of the crew, was acknowledgement enough. Around her, passengers were now openly observing. Some were hesitant, almost reverent, as they whispered, "Is she really a SEAL?" Others were caught between disbelief and admiration, their expressions betraying a mixture of incredulity and respect. Phones were discreetly raised, capturing the encounter that would soon circulate across social media. Sophia had inadvertently become the focus of a viral moment, a living example of authority, calm, and capability. A soft voice broke through the quiet, tentative but filled with awe. An older woman seated a few rows away leaned forward. "Are you really a Navy SEAL?" Her eyes shone with curiosity and respect. Sophia met her gaze, her expression calm, neutral, but not unkind. "Yes," she said quietly. "I just want everyone to have a safe and comfortable flight, same as anyone else." The woman's mouth opened slightly, words failing her. For a moment, Sophia felt the familiar stir of recognition, not the fleeting praise of strangers, but the deep acknowledgement that comes from understanding courage, discipline, and lived experience. Her phone buzzed again, vibrating against the armrest. She glanced discreetly. Another text from a SEAL comrade read, "You think that was the end? You just painted a target on your back." A private smirk tugged at her lips. Even in the absurdity of civilian life, The realities of her past missions never left her. Every action carried potential consequences. Here, it wasn't insurgents or enemy fire, but the unpredictability of attention, curiosity, and human behavior in a confined space could be just as potent. Sophia shifted slightly in her seat, scanning the cabin with measured focus. The man who had previously mocked her now avoided eye contact, his posture slumped. His arms rested tensely in his lap, hands twisting nervously. The subtle, unspoken lesson had been absorbed. Respect is earned, often silently, through the presence of experience and authority. She allowed herself a small, private acknowledgement of the power of presence. The lesson she had imparted was not one of aggression, but of calm dominance. The cabin atmosphere had shifted entirely. Where there had been doubt, there was now tentative admiration. Where there had been tension, there was recognition of authority. Passengers continued to murmur, some whispering to one another, "Did you see how she handled him?" Or, "I've never seen someone so calm, yet so commanding." Their eyes darted from Sophia to the man in first class, the silent drama having left a lasting impression. Sophia's attention, however, was not solely on the man. She remained alert to the cabin, observing body language, gauging emotional reactions, ensuring the calm she had established would hold for the duration of the flight. She had learned from experience that maintaining order required constant vigilance, even after the immediate threat had passed. A flight attendant approached, her expression still tinged with awe and disbelief. "Ma'am, thank you. We didn't know how to handle him. You just solved it." Sophia offered a subtle nod. "Just calm presence," she replied softly. "Sometimes that's more effective than any argument." Her tone was conversational, almost casual, but it carried the weight of her experience, the authority of someone who had survived high-stakes situations countless times. Nearby, passengers continued to steal glances, some whispering in hushed tones, others recording the moment discreetly. The lesson Sophia had delivered was sinking in. Quiet, commanding authority could resolve conflict without raising voices or inciting fear. Respect could be taught with demeanor alone, without aggression. The man who had caused the disturbance now avoided further interaction, but Sophia didn't leave things unresolved entirely. She allowed him a brief, pointed look, a silent reminder that respect was not optional. He understood. Without a word, he had absorbed the lesson. Underestimate her at your peril. The pilot's voice over the intercom broke the tension further, but in a way that acknowledged Sophia's skill. "Ms. Hart, thank you. The situation is resolved. Your presence and judgment have been invaluable." Sophia inclined her head slightly, accepting the acknowledgement with her usual grace. She knew the work of influence was never finished. Even after immediate threats had been neutralized, awareness and vigilance remained critical. Every passenger, crew member, and by extension, every situation required observation. Even small cues could indicate lingering tension or potential escalation. As the cabin settled into a quieter, more respectful rhythm, Sophia allowed herself a moment to reflect. The lesson she had delivered wasn't simply for the man who had mocked her. It was for everyone present. It was a demonstration of how authority and experience could command attention and respect, silently yet undeniably. Passengers shifted in their seats, some whispering in awe, some cautiously nodding to one another. Cameras continued to capture footage, though the energy in the cabin was markedly different from the chaos moments before. Sophia's presence had established a new baseline: calm, measured authority, and earned respect. She exhaled slowly, allowing the small sense of satisfaction to settle. This was a lesson she had learned in the field countless times. Power is most effective when it is understated, when it is felt rather than loudly announced. Yet she remained aware. Experience had taught her that recognition could attract attention, sometimes admiration, sometimes scrutiny, sometimes danger. She scanned the cabin subtly, her eyes catching the glances of passengers and crew alike, maintaining awareness of the human landscape around her. One young man leaned over to a companion, whispering, "I can't believe what just happened." She didn't even raise her voice and he just stopped. The older woman who had first asked if she was a seal gave a quiet nod of acknowledgement. Sophia met her gaze briefly, offering a faint, subtle smile. It was recognition exchanged silently, without words, a mutual understanding of discipline, skill, and courage. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from her buddy, viral in T-10 minutes. Sophia allowed herself a private, dry chuckle. Even in situations far from battlefields or covert missions, her life seemed to carry echoes of her past. Conflict, judgment, and unpredictability followed her, even on a commercial flight. As the plane cruised above the city lights, the cabin now calm, Sophia leaned back, observing quietly. The man who had caused trouble remained subdued, no longer a threat. The other passengers whispered, watched, and recorded the unfolding quiet drama. Order had been restored, respect had been earned, and tension had been dissolved, not by aggression, but by calm authority and presence. Yet she remained vigilant. Even now she knew a tension like this could create complications. Observation, subtle cues, and readiness to act remained essential. Humility and respect had been taught, but the flight was far from over, and unforeseen events could always arise. As she settled into her seat, passengers continued to murmur their admiration, capturing footage and recounting the story in whispers. Sophia's presence had permanently altered the tone of the cabin. She had demonstrated that authority was not a matter of force or volume. It was a matter of experience, calmness, and the quiet command of attention. The suspense lingered, subtle but unbroken. Though immediate tension had dissolved, the world outside the cockpit was unpredictable, just as it always had been. The lesson in respect was complete, but life, as she had learned over years of missions and survival, always carried another challenge just beyond the horizon. Sophia Hart, Navy SEAL, had asserted authority, diffused a volatile situation, and earned respect. Yet even as the passengers whispered and watched, she knew better than to relax fully. Vigilance and readiness were lifelong companions. The cabin, now subdued and reverent, reflected a new truth. Underestimation could be fatal, authority commanded respect, and calm presence was often more powerful than aggression. Sophia had taught this lesson silently, effectively, and irreversibly. The mission in its civilian form had been successful. But Sophia knew, as any veteran does, that challenges never truly end, they only evolve. And above the clouds at 35,000 feet she remained alert, poised, and ready for whatever came next. The cabin had settled into a tense but orderly rhythm. Passengers whispered quietly, still stealing glances at Sophia Hart, their curiosity and admiration palpable. For now the immediate conflict was over, yet she knew the calm was temporary. Experience had taught her that tension rarely dissipates completely, especially in confined spaces where fear, ego, and unpredictability mingle like volatile chemicals. Sophia adjusted her seat slightly, scanning the cabin without overt movement. Her eyes were trained to pick up micro-expressions, subtle body shifts, and anomalies in behavior. Every passenger was a potential variable. Even in this ordinary setting, her instincts were alive, primed by years of survival and high-stakes missions. She noticed the man who had previously caused chaos. He had settled back into his seat, but there was a residual tension in his shoulders, a nervous twitch in his hand as he fidgeted with the armrest. He was subdued but alert, wary. The lesson she had delivered had been effective, but she remained aware that suppressed defiance could surface unpredictably. Her gaze moved across the cabin, noting a young man sitting near the rear of first class. Something about him unsettled her. His posture was casual, almost too relaxed, but his eyes darted intermittently toward the cockpit and the SEAL now seated in economy. His hands fiddled subtly with a small metallic object concealed beneath the tray table. Sophia's pulse quickened, not from fear but from awareness. Subtle cues were often more revealing than overt aggression. She had trained to detect these nuances in hostile environments, where split-second decisions determined survival. The object in the young man's hand was small, but potentially dangerous. In her mind, a dozen scenarios unfolded in rapid succession, each weighted with risk. She shifted imperceptibly in her seat, positioning herself to monitor him without drawing attention. Passengers around her continued their subdued chatter, oblivious to the tension only she could sense. The cabin felt suddenly smaller, charged with a current of potential threat. Turbulence began to rock the plane gently, the engines humming steadily but the slight shakes amplifying the underlying tension. Passengers murmured uneasily, some gripping armrests, unaware of the subtler storm unfolding in the back of first class. Sophia's training had taught her that turbulence often masks human instability. Fear amplifies subtle impulses, and in close quarters, small threats can escalate quickly. Her mind raced. How to approach this without alarming the cabin? How to neutralize a potential threat quietly? Her instincts told her to act, to assess, to control, but the environment demanded subtlety, finesse, and psychological acuity. A direct confrontation could trigger panic, turning minor disruption into chaos. Sophia leaned slightly forward, her eyes locking on the young man. Her presence alone, though seated and calm, radiated authority. Subconsciously, he flinched, momentarily uncertain whether to continue his covert fiddling. Awareness of the seal among the passengers had already begun to influence his behavior. The pilot's calm voice over the intercom added an extra layer of tension, though unintentionally. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and secure your belongings. We are experiencing light turbulence." Sophia noted the distraction and adjusted her observation. Turbulence heightened anxiety, potentially triggering impulsive behavior. The young man's subtle movements became more pronounced, his hand twitching under the tray table as he struggled to conceal whatever he was holding. She allowed herself a controlled exhale, centering her focus. Years of high-pressure negotiation and tactical observation had taught her that the key to controlling a volatile environment is patience and calculated positioning. Every passenger, every crew member, every glance mattered. Sophia's mind ran through the possible outcomes. Could she address this verbally without alerting the entire cabin? Could a subtle gesture, a shift in position, or a glance neutralize the threat? Her experience suggested yes, but timing and precision were everything. One misstep and panic could spread like wildfire. The young man finally looked up, catching her gaze. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. He understood at that instant that his actions were being observed and that the consequences of discovery were immediate. Sophia's hand remained relaxed in her lap. She didn't reach for him, didn't confront loudly. She simply projected presence, authority, and unyielding awareness. Her posture, her eyes, the quiet intensity of her gaze, these were enough to unsettle him without alarming the cabin. The turbulence intensified slightly, and a passenger a few rows back gasped, gripping the armrest. Sophia's attention flicked briefly to them. Human behavior could escalate unpredictably under stress, but she quickly returned focus to the young man. He shifted nervously, adjusting the tray table, then slowly lowered his hand, revealing nothing overtly dangerous. Yet the subtle tension in his body remained, the anxiety in his eyes betraying his intentions. Sophia didn't relax. Awareness, she reminded herself, is a constant exercise. Threats don't always reveal themselves openly. They often hide in hesitation, micro-movements, and instinctive reactions. Minutes stretched, each one waited with anticipation. Passengers whispered quietly among themselves, unaware of the delicate psychological standoff occurring. Sophia remained a calm, silent force, her presence alone controlling the flow of behavior in the cabin. Finally, the young man slouched back into his seat, avoiding eye contact. He no longer fidgeted with the object, whatever it had been. Sophia allowed herself a faint, private acknowledgement. Her observation and subtle influence had neutralized the potential threat without confrontation, without panic, without drama. She leaned back slightly, scanning the cabin again, noting the lingering unease among some passengers. Turbulence continued, light but persistent, amplifying anxiety and testing nerves. Sophia's trained instincts kept her alert, her mind analyzing each detail. The shift of a shoulder, the twitch of a hand, the nervous glance of a stewardess. Her phone buzzed quietly on the seat beside her. She glanced briefly. Another text from a SEAL comrade. "Sounds like you've got the whole cabin under control. Don't let up." A wry smile tugged at her lips. Even thousands of feet above the ground, far removed from missions in deserts or jungles, she was operating in the same principle. Control perception, observe every variable and act decisively when necessary. The environment might have changed, but the skill set remained identical. The pilot's voice again cut through the intercom, calm and steady. "We are now above the worst of the turbulence. Thank you for remaining seated. Cabin conditions should stabilize shortly." Sophia's gaze flicked one last time toward the rear of first class. The young man remained subdued, aware now that his intentions, whatever they had been noticed. Respect, awareness, and authority had neutralized the potential escalation. The lesson was silent but unmistakable. Underestimation carried consequences, and subtle presence was often more powerful than overt confrontation. She allowed herself a slow, measured exhale. The cabin was calmer now, the subtle psychological tension diffused, though her senses remained alert. Experience had taught her never to fully relax, even when immediate danger had passed. Observation and preparedness were constants. Passengers continued to murmur quietly, whispering about the drama they had witnessed. Phones recorded discreetly, some passengers visibly impressed by the woman in economy who had commanded attention and authority in first class. Sophia's presence had altered the tone of the entire flight, demonstrating the power of calm observation and precise action. The turbulence continued briefly, rocking the plane gently. Sophia adjusted her seatbelt, her senses still attuned, her mind running through contingencies. Every passenger was a variable, every movement a potential trigger, every glance a source of information. She was ready for the unexpected as always. And in the stillness that followed, the quiet acknowledgement of control and authority settled over the cabin. The immediate threat had been neutralized, tension had been diffused, and respect had been earned, not through aggression, but through awareness, observation, and subtle dominance. Yet the suspense lingered. Turbulence, human behavior, and the unpredictability of a confined space ensured that challenges could arise at any moment. Sophia remained alert, poised, and ready to act, understanding that calm authority was never a guarantee, only a tool to shape the environment and influence behavior. Above the clouds, at 35,000 feet, she remained a silent guardian, aware that respect had been earned but vigilance must continue. The cabin might seem calm, but she knew better. Any flight, any moment, could demand the same precision, observation, and quiet authority that had guided her through countless missions. And now, through an extraordinary civilian ordeal at 30,000 feet. Sophia Hart, Navy SEAL, had maintained control, diffused tension, and ensured the safety of the cabin, all through observation, awareness, and subtle influence. But the day, the flight, and the human element still carried the unpredictable potential to challenge even her extraordinary skills. The suspense lingered. What would the next moment bring, and how would she respond when it did? The plane had regained a semblance of calm. Passengers were seated, tray tables locked, and turbulence had diminished to occasional tremors that barely rocked the cabin. Yet beneath the surface, a new tension lingered, subtle but undeniable. Sophia Hart, seated in economy, remained vigilant. She knew that human behavior, especially in confined spaces with high visibility, could shift unpredictably. Phones were now subtly raised, cameras discreetly capturing moments of her quiet authority. The man she had confronted earlier remained slouched, subdued, yet fully aware of the scrutiny. He was no longer a threat, but the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Every passenger had witnessed it, the calm, precise, unshakable force of a woman who commanded respect without shouting, without intimidation, and without chaos. The whispers spread like wildfire, growing louder in the cabin. "Did you see her?" one passenger murmured to another. "She didn't even yell and he just froze." "She's a seal," someone else added, eyes wide. "Look at her tattoo." Sophia's gaze flicked up subtly, noticing the quiet frenzy that had begun. It was no longer about a single passenger's defiance. It was about perception, about recognition, and about the viral power of social media in the digital age. Phones clicked continuously, tiny flashes of light reflecting off polished tray tables. The whispers and murmurs had become a chorus of curiosity, awe, and admiration. A stewardess, approaching cautiously to check on the cabin, leaned in towards Sophia. "Ma'am, people are recording everything. The footage is already circulating online. They're calling it the seal who tamed first class." Sophia allowed herself a faint smile, though her mind remained alert. The world outside the plane had the potential to amplify a private moment into a public spectacle, and social media could be both a tool and a trap. Her experience had taught her that attention, admiration, and scrutiny were double-edged. They could command respect or attract unwelcome challenges. The man in first class, now fully aware of the cabin's attention, shifted nervously. His earlier arrogance had evaporated entirely, replaced by a subtle panic as he realized he was part of a viral moment. He had expected anonymity in his defiance. Instead, the narrative had flipped entirely. Sophia observed him carefully, noting the micro-expressions, the twitch of a hand, the way his eyes darted to cameras, the stiffening of his posture. Even subdued, he carried tension, but the balance of authority had decisively shifted. Presence alone had reshaped perception, and she maintained her advantage. Meanwhile, whispers and comments spread through the cabin like wildfire. "I can't believe how calm she was. She didn't even have to raise her voice. She's like dangerous calm, you can feel it." Even the pilot, monitoring from the cockpit, allowed himself a small smile. Sophia had managed the flight in a way that no instruction manual could teach. She had neutralized conflict, asserted authority, and now, inadvertently, created a viral sensation in real time. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from a SEAL buddy. "You're trending already, hashtags everywhere, SEAL in the sky first class named." She exhaled slowly, her expression composed. Fame, attention, and admiration were fleeting. They carried power, yes, but they also attracted scrutiny and expectation. She understood that even this digital ripple could have consequences. Every viral moment altered perception, not always favorably. A young passenger near the aisle leaned toward a companion. "Do you think she even realized she was being filmed?" "She probably doesn't care," the companion replied. "She just handles things. It's like she's not even trying, and yet wow." Sophia allowed herself to reflect briefly. Authority, in her experience, did not require spectacle. Presence, awareness, and subtle control were enough to influence behavior, to neutralize threats, and to command respect. Yet she also knew that perception was fluid. Viral attention could reinforce her authority or complicate her next steps. The man she had confronted earlier fidgeted under the scrutiny, now fully aware that every movement, every gesture was being documented and judged. He had underestimated her once, and the consequences were visible in real time. The passengers had already absorbed the lesson. Do not underestimate presence, experience, and unshakable composure. A stewardess approached cautiously, whispering, "Sir, please remain calm. The passengers, they're reacting to what just happened. They're amazed." Sophia glanced briefly at the man. His eyes flicked nervously to the cameras, to the phones, and to her. The subtle, silent authority she projected was magnified exponentially by the attention, reinforcing the lesson in ways words alone could not. Even in the rear of economy, passengers whispered among themselves, "She's a real seal, can you believe it?" She didn't yell once, she didn't have to. "Look at the way he's reacting. That's respect, not fear." The pilot's voice again cut through the intercom. Calm, professional, but tinged with acknowledgement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful for your patience and cooperation. Ms. Hart's assistance has ensured a smooth and safe flight. Please remain seated, and thank you for your understanding." Sophia allowed herself a small, private acknowledgement. The pilot's words reinforced the subtle authority she had established, providing institutional validation to the respect already present among the passengers. Yet she remained vigilant. Viral attention, while impressive, could also attract unpredictability. Awareness, observation, and readiness remained essential. A child in first class tugged at a parent's sleeve. "Mom, did she really stop him?" The parent whispered awed, "Yes, she did," calmly, without yelling. She just stood there. Sophia's gaze softened briefly, catching the subtle reverence in the parent's eyes. This wasn't just about authority. It was about modeling control, courage, and composure in the face of conflict. The lesson extended beyond the immediate passenger who had caused chaos. It was now a demonstration for everyone on board. Her phone buzzed again. Another message: "Videos going viral. Social media is lighting up. People are calling it the seal who taught first-class respect." She allowed herself a quiet, private smile. Even in this civilian context, she had executed a mission. Conflict neutralized, respect asserted, tension diffused. The added layer of viral attention was unplanned, but it was a secondary consequence of her skill and presence. The man who had challenged her remained subdued, shoulders slumped, awareness sharpened. The lesson had been internalized, amplified by the attention of everyone around him. Humility, awareness, and respect had been imparted, not with aggression but with precise, controlled presence. Sophia glanced around the cabin one last time, noting the subtle shifts. Passengers whispering, recording, and nodding in quiet acknowledgement. Crew members reassured. The pilot monitoring from the cockpit with calm approval. Every variable had been assessed, every subtle threat neutralized, and now the viral attention magnified the outcome. Above the clouds, the plane continued its steady path. Turbulence had subsided, yet the tension lingered subtly, a reminder that human behavior, like weather, could shift unpredictably. Sophia remained alert, poised, and ready, her mind analyzing contingencies while projecting calm authority. The cabin's energy had transformed entirely. What began as a potential crisis had become a masterclass in influence, perception, and presence. Every whisper, every glance, every recording reinforced the lesson: underestimate her at your peril. Even as the plane cruised smoothly, the suspense lingered. How would the viral attention ripple beyond the cabin? How would the passengers, the media, and the world interpret what they had witnessed? Sophia's calm authority had neutralized immediate threats, but the consequences of perception, once amplified by social media, were unpredictable. Her mind, ever alert, acknowledged the truth. Every action has reverberations, and influence, once observed, cannot be easily contained. The viral moment had immortalized the lesson she had delivered, amplifying its impact far beyond the metal confines of the aircraft. Sophia Hart, Navy SEAL, had not sought attention, viral fame, or recognition. Yet her presence, experience, and unshakable composure had produced exactly that outcome. The lesson had transcended the immediate threat, becoming an example of authority, respect, and the quiet power of control. And as she leaned back in her seat, observing the subtle awe and admiration around her, she remained fully aware. The flight was far from ordinary, and the world beyond the cabin now had a glimpse of the extraordinary calm, precision, and authority that she carried. The suspense lingered, thick and electric. Viral attention had magnified the drama, but new challenges, reactions, and consequences were inevitable. Sophia Hart's mission in the sky had succeeded, but the story was far from over. The plane began its gradual descent, engines humming with steady precision, the city lights below stretching into a shimmering tapestry of streets and neon. Passengers adjusted in their seats, glancing occasionally toward the aisle where Sophia Hart remained seated, calm, collected, and unshaken. The turbulence had ceased, the cabin had regained order, and yet a subtle tension lingered, a residue of the drama that had unfolded at 35,000 feet. Sophia's gaze swept across the cabin one final time. The man who had challenged her weeks of peace and civility in the air sat slouched in his seat, pale and subdued, his eyes avoiding hers. The lesson had been learned. Respect had been earned, not through force, not through spectacle, but through presence, precision, and calm authority. The murmurs of passengers filled the space quietly, no longer whispers of tension, but a mixture of awe, fascination, and curiosity. Phones were discreetly put away, yet Sophia knew the videos and social media posts had already begun their digital journey. She had unintentionally become the focus of a viral moment, a real-life lesson in authority captured on cell phones and now likely reaching thousands across the country. The flight attendants moved with a quiet confidence that reflected the calm Sophia had restored. One of them approached, a subtle smile tugging at her lips. "Ma'am, you've changed the atmosphere in this cabin entirely. Everyone is talking about it. They're impressed, to say the least." Sophia nodded, expression serene. "Just ensuring everyone feels safe and respected," she replied softly, her tone calm, almost casual, but carrying the weight of authority. Passengers continued to glance her way, some nodding subtly, others whispering to companions. One young man leaned over, wide-eyed, and whispered, "She's incredible. I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that." Sophia allowed herself a private, quiet acknowledgement. She had faced countless life-and-death scenarios in her career, situations where failure had immediate, often fatal consequences. Yet this strange, high-altitude theater of conflict and perception had tested her in a different way. It required the same skills, awareness, precision, and calm authority, but without the cover of tactical gear, without the clear lines of combat. Here, every action, every glance, every word had carried weight. The plane banked gently over the city, the descent smooth, and the pilot's calm voice cut through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. We appreciate your understanding during our flight." Sophia's eyes flicked subtly toward the cockpit. The pilot offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of trust and shared understanding. Their unspoken communication reflected a mutual respect earned in a few intense moments. She had handled what no training manual could prepare the crew for, and she had done it flawlessly. The man who had previously been defiant remained subdued, his posture reflecting the internalization of the lesson Sophia had imparted. Her presence had not only neutralized immediate conflict, but had reshaped perception in a subtle yet permanent way. Respect, once overlooked, had now been instilled. As the plane touched down, tires skimming the tarmac with precise authority, passengers adjusted in their seats, readying themselves for the arrival. Phones were discreetly stored, whispered commentary filled the cabin, and the atmosphere had shifted entirely from tension to quiet admiration. Sophia rose, gathering her belongings with deliberate calm. She moved through the cabin as passengers subtly stepped aside, offering silent acknowledgement of the authority she had asserted. Cameras and phones still clicked, capturing the final moments of a flight that had become more than transportation. It had become a stage for a lesson in respect, perception, and human behavior. The man from first class avoided eye contact as she passed, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by a subdued awareness. The unspoken message was clear. Misjudgment had consequences, and authority, even quiet authority, was never to be underestimated. Passengers whispered quietly to one another, recounting the events with awe. "Did you see how calm she was?" one asked. "She didn't even raise her voice," another replied, and he just stopped completely. Even the children on board were mesmerized, having witnessed the unspoken lesson unfold in real time. Sophia's presence had communicated more than words ever could: discipline, authority, and the subtle, undeniable force of experience. As the passengers disembarked, subtle nods and quiet words of admiration were exchanged. Some approached, hesitant but eager. "Excuse me, are you really a seal?" one asked. Sophia offered a calm, measured nod. "Yes, just someone ensuring respect and safety." A faint smile of understanding passed between them. Recognition, respect, and quiet acknowledgement had been exchanged without the need for fanfare or dramatics. The viral videos and whispers would follow her beyond the airport, spreading across social media, transforming a high-altitude confrontation into a widely shared lesson in authority and composure. Sophia was aware of this, and she remained unshaken. Fame or attention was secondary. The principle of earned respect was what mattered most. As she stepped off the plane, the cool airport air carrying the distant hum of activity, she felt the familiar surge of reflection that always followed a mission. Each experience, no matter the context, offered lessons in awareness, judgment, and human behavior. Even in a civilian setting, her skills had been tested and validated. Sophia's phone buzzed once more. Another message from her SEAL comrades. "You just turned a domestic flight into a masterclass in presence. Bravo." She allowed herself a subtle, private smile. Even in moments far removed from the battlefield, the principles remained unchanged. Observation, precision, and controlled authority ensured outcomes, shaped perceptions, and commanded respect. The man who had challenged her had quietly exited, subdued, likely reflecting on the lesson he had learned at 35,000 feet. Other passengers, now scattered into the terminal, would carry the story forward through whispers, videos, and memories. Sophia's calm presence had become a ripple, an influence extending far beyond the metal confines of the plane. Even as she walked through the terminal, her eyes scanning subtly for the ordinary and the unexpected, she carried with her the weight of experience and awareness. Every glance, every subtle shift in behavior, every ripple of perception reminded her that authority, respect, and human behavior were intertwined, and the lessons she had imparted, quietly yet decisively, would endure far beyond this flight. Security personnel glanced curiously as she passed, noticing the composed, unflinching presence that radiated calm authority. Some instinctively recognized the markers, the posture, the bearing, the unspoken command of attention. Sophia moved past them with quiet assurance, fully aware of the invisible mark she left on every space she entered. Passengers streamed past, carrying their videos and stories, the viral moment spreading into the world outside the plane. Sophia knew that for them, the memory of calm authority, precise control, and quiet presence would linger far longer than the physical journey. Finally, she paused near the terminal exit, taking a slow, deliberate breath. She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The flight had tested more than patience and composure. It had tested perception, judgment, and influence in a confined civilian setting. She had succeeded. Respect had been earned, authority asserted, and chaos prevented, all without a single shout, without aggression, and without compromising calm. The city lights glimmered outside the terminal windows, a reminder that the world, much like the sky, was vast, unpredictable, and full of challenges, both seen and unseen. Sophia Hart, Navy SEAL, had navigated one such challenge with precision, presence, and discipline. As she disappeared into the flow of passengers, her figure calm, composed, and resolute, the lesson lingered. Every whisper, every recording, every shared story carried forward a single truth. Authority is earned, respect is commanded, and calm presence wielded with precision is more powerful than any display of force. The flight was over, but its impact had just begun. And as the terminal buzzed with activity, the viral ripples of her actions extended outward, transforming a single, tense encounter into a legend whispered across screens, conversations, and memories. Above all, Sophia remained unshaken, poised, and alert, ready for whatever came next. Because in her world, whether skis, seas, or streets, vigilance never ends and respect once earned is a legacy that endures.